My name is Bartholomew, and I am 13 years old. I opened up my brother's head on accident, and I don't know how to put it back together again. Mom and Dad had sent us out so they could talk to an ugly man in a suit about what to do with Pop's money now he was dead. Dad was angry because Pop had secretly spent all his money on horse racing, and now there was none left for us. Dad told me he was glad Pop was dead. I didn't believe him. Me and Joel were playing at the pit. It's in the woods on the outskirts of the city. Two big tunnels poke out from the bottom of a hill, spraying water when it's been raining a lot. There's a big hole underneath the tunnels. Everything the water stole from the city piles up there. It's usually pretty dry in the summer, and you can find all sorts of stuff. License plates, bike helmets, Happy Meal toys. Last year we even found a cat, but it wasn't alive anymore. We pretend we're pirates hunting for treasure. I know it's dumb, but it keeps Joel smiling. He's only 10. The other kids in his class call him Moley Joel because he looks like a mole, small with round glasses and big buck teeth. He didn't like that name, and neither did I. I only ever called him Joel. We were stood on a long piece of plywood called the plank. It poked out over the pit just like a pirate ship. It was Joel's turn to walk the plank. I was the captain, waving around my sword, a window wiper, and demanding that he follow my orders, calling me captain for the rest of the day. You're only allowed off the plank if you do as the captain says. Those were the rules. It's my turn to be captain, he whined, shaking his head as he shuffled away from me and down the plank. I never get to be captain. I whipped the wiper back and forth. You need to be strong to be a captain, I said. Joel stamped his little foot and the wood moaned. I am strong, I want to be captain, he said. His eyes welled up with tears, which just made me angry. He always cried to get out of trouble with Mom and Dad, and the blame landed on me. I swung the wiper harder, pushing Joel back towards the very edge of the plank. You can't, I said. You can go later. I don't want to play then, he said, wobbling on the spot. Tears ran down his chubby cheeks. Call me captain, I shouted. No, he said. He ran towards me. The sudden burst of courage caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to do something so dumb. The wiper whipped him across the cheek with a loud thwack. The force of the hit sent Joel's head spinning, and his body turned with it. He let out a gentle whimper as his hand grasped at his face. His left foot slipped from the plank. Then he was gone. The silence was agonizing. No screams or cries, just the light breeze blowing through the trees. It was as if he'd grown wings and flown away. Joel landed with a wet thud. Thorns and nettles tore at my skin as I ran down the hill. My thighs hummed with welts and cuts. My face was sticky with tears. I'd never wanted to hurt him. You have to believe me. It was one stupid mistake, an accident, I swear. I found him lying on his back in the middle of the pit. His fall had been broken by rotten bags of rubbish. Some had exploded, ejecting takeaway boxes and half-eaten kebabs. Maggots crawled around like tiny explorers. Joel's head rested against a thick concrete block that jutted out from the filth. His eyes were open, wide, staring out at the darkening skies. His mouth opened and closed like a goldfish, but no sound came out. A trickle of red crept its way down the concrete block and into the dirt. I dropped to my knees beside him. I wiped my nose against my hand and prodded ribs. Please be alive, I said. Said Joel, his lips twitching in different directions. You okay? Come on, we got to go, I said, offering a weak smile. If I didn't make a big fuss out of the fall, maybe Joel wouldn't either. His head lolled to the side and his arms went limp. He let out a long, monotone moan. His eyes were still open, watching the sun go behind some dark clouds. I leant forward and shook his shoulder. Please, I said. Joel smacked his lips together, his eyes refocusing. Captain, he croaked. I smiled. He was still alive. It hurts, he said. Where? Everywhere. I lifted his head up, away from the concrete block. Strings of thick red dribbled down the strands of his hair. Joel whimpered as he pulled himself upwards. You're okay, right? I asked, giving him another desperate smile. He looked at me with a blank expression. Then he winced as if he'd forgotten who I was. Eventually, his eyes softened, and he smiled. "I think so," he said. "I'm sorry," I said. I took off my beanie and wrapped it over his head, tucking his sodden hair into the back of it. "You can be captain now," I said. His left eye blinked, then his right. It was just a tiny accident, a bang on the head. No need to tell Mom and Dad about it, especially Dad. He'd get real angry and smash the place to bits again, and it wouldn't just be me in trouble. Both of us knew we shouldn't be there. We had to keep this quiet. If Joel still felt bad the next day, I'd take him to the school nurse. That's what we agreed as we walked back home for dinner. Joel didn't say much. He looked pale. His face was gormless, mouth slack, eyes staring straight ahead. His brow was furrowed like he couldn't understand what was happening. But when I patted him on the back, he offered me a gentle smile. By the time we got home, the sun was hiding behind the trees, casting long shadows that crisscrossed over our house. We crept inside, checking the atmosphere before announcing ourselves. The small TV in the dining room was blaring a cricket match between England and Australia. England was way behind. Dad's mood wasn't going to be good. He sat at the dining table, eyes locked on the TV, like a lion watching its prey. On the table were leaflets with titles like Information for Bereaved Relatives and Untangling Inheritance Tax. "Hey," I said meekly. A clash of metal came from the kitchen and all three of us jumped. "For Christ's sake, Marie," spat Dad. "Sorry," came Mom's shaky voice. He grunted, his eyes never leaving the television. Mom always kept the peace. "Where you been?" asked Dad, refusing to look at me. "Playing in the park," I said as casually as I could muster. Dad flicked his head towards me, reminding me how dark his eyes were. I inched myself in front of Joel. Dad's gaze followed me, trying to figure out what to do next. Did he believe me? Was it worth his time to find out? "Boundary," yelled the commentator from the TV. Dad turned back around. England had hit a 4. He let out a satisfied hiss, kicking the chair in front of him and taking another sip of his beer. "Set the table," yelled Mom. Joel shuffled towards the chest of drawers, muttering to himself. He swayed with each step as if he was on a boat during a storm. I felt a sharp pang of panic shoot up my spine. Adverts came on the telly, so Dad changed the channel. A picture of Pop Pop filled the screen. The news presenter said that the police were still on the hunt for those who did it. There'd been a lady from the police who spent a lot of time at the house talking to Mom and Dad, especially Dad. She didn't seem like the hunters you see in the movies, the ones you see taking down a lion or elephant. She was more like a tired zombie with coffee breath. "I wish they'd just give up," spat Dad at no one in particular. "Don't say that. They'll find him," said Mom, stern but calm. I watched Joel set the table like he did every night, except he was doing it all wrong. He placed the knives where the forks usually went and set the forks upside down in the middle of the mat. He'd rested cups teetering on the edge of the table, ready to fall and smash, sending Dad into a frenzy. Joel was moving strangely, hands shaking, eyes stuck to the floor. I touched his arm and turned him away from Dad. His skin felt cold and wet. He looked like spilt milk. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Pop Pop is here," he muttered, eyes down. "Huh?" I said, behind the lamp. "Don't be stupid. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried about what I might see, but I risked a glance anyway. The space was empty. "There's nobody there," I said. The light flickered slightly. "He's smiling, but I don't like it," yelled Joel, the volume of his voice suddenly going out of control. "Who is?" asked Dad. His eyes darted to the mess on the table. "Stop fucking around and do as you're told," he shouted. I placed everything back where it should be. Joel begged to sit in my seat so he didn't have to look at Pop Pop's black eyes. As he shuffled past, I caught a look at the back of his head. A murky octopus had spread out inside the beanie, but the blood hadn't dribbled down his neck. Maybe it had scabbed over. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe everything was going to be okay. "He wants to come back," Joel whispered as I walked past. His fingers wormed their way to the back of his head and underneath the beanie. I slapped his arm. "Don't pick it," I said. "You'll just make it worse." Mom brought out dinner. Dad tried to say a prayer for Pop Pop, but he ran out of words. He kept saying sorry over and over again. After a while, the sorry turned to crying. His body shuddered as he wailed, cursing Pop Pop, God, and everyone in between. This happened a lot since the funeral. The rest of us normally watched him in silence, but this time Joel joined in. He made a sound between a cry and a scream. His wide eyes were on me, a little terrified boy. Dad leaned over and held Joel's hands, clasping them with love. Joel always got their love. It didn't stop his screaming. Over Joel's shoulder, I could see the lamp. I tried to imagine Pop Pop crouched behind it, smiling at me. Eyes sat upon two fat lids. The folds in his face twisted into a smile. Lips yanked towards the sky. Nothing. There was nothing there, but Joel kept screaming. So did Dad. They both screamed like scared little boys. Except Joel's face wasn't sad. It was terrified. Drool dripped from his chin. Mom had stopped crying and looked at Joel with concern. She knew something wasn't right. I kicked up from the table. "Stop it," I yelled. "Stop crying like stupid, I already knew I'd messed up before Dad launched himself from his seat and stormed over to me. For a fat man, he moved quick. His thundering steps made the knives and forks shiver on the table. He stuck his stomach out as he towered over me, blocking out the light from the lamp. "Finish what you said," he barked. I'd made a mistake and I had to be punished. He'd found the excuse he needed. He knew it. We both did. I shook my head, wrapping my lips over my teeth. Talking back only ever made it worse. He slapped me across the face with the back of his hand. The lamp exploded, sending shards of glass into the room. Everything went black. A long silence followed and I held my cheek in the darkness. The pain rang across my jaw and rattled my teeth. Joel whimpered from the other end of the room. At least he'd stopped crying. "Go to your room, both of you," came Mom's voice, fading away as quickly as it appeared. Dad remained silent in the dark. I remembered Pop Pop's last breath in the hospital. It was angry and full of phlegm. I didn't want to see him like that, but Dad said we needed a photo for the evening news, so I stood next to the old man, all broken and coughing up blood from the beating he'd taken. It had been a burglary gone wrong, nothing taken, just an old man beaten to death with a bat. I almost wet myself. When Dad was dealing with the reporter, Pop Pop gurgled something to me. I can't believe it. He died not long after, and his rasping breath filled my ears as I took Joel upstairs, long and full of bubbles like a boiling kettle. It was coming from the corner of the room right where the lamp was. But when Mom switched the main light on, there was no Pop Pop, only broken glass. By the time we reached our bedroom, Joel was shivering. As he mumbled to himself, he staggered towards the center of the room where a broken office chair stood, one of our prized finds from the pit. He clumsily collapsed into the chair, his body rigid, as if he'd forgotten how to sit. "Pop Pop isn't here anymore," I said, "so stop worrying." "I'm not worried," Joel murmured. A high-pitched whine came from the chair as he slowly spun it towards me. "He's not here for me or you," he said. "What does that mean?" I asked. Joel slid further down the chair, almost lying flat across it. "We've got to help him," he said, "like good kippers." My heart jolted in my chest. Kippers was a nickname Pop Pop used to call us. Joel always hated it because even the smell of fish made him sick. Pop Pop found it hilarious. The light in the room flickered and Joel was cast in shadows. The light hit his face at odd angles, turning it into different shapes. It wasn't his face anymore. It was sharp and angular, wrinkled. It smiled at me. Then Joel's chubby face returned. I felt hot, my clothes sticking to my skin. I thought I was going to be sick. "My head itches," Joel said. His fingers wormed their way beneath the beanie, writhing between the strands of his hair. His eyes were fixed on me. "Stop it," I said, but it was too late. Joel's fingers returned covered in blood. Between them, he held a writhing maggot. A smile crept across his face. His left eye blinked, then his right. "Bart!" shouted Mum from the landing. "Come here!" I looked to the door and back to Joel. If I stayed, Mum would come into the room and I'd be dead. If I left, Joel could get up to anything. He watched on the maggot, bringing it close to his eyes, letting it crawl across his glasses. He seemed to have calmed down. I told myself that he was just tired. The pit was crawling with maggots. It's not surprising one found its way into his beanie. I could fix him. I just need a bowl and a sponge, and I could clean Joel up by the morning. It was all going to be fine. I left the room. Mom was sitting at the side of her bed, clutching 2 bowls of mash and veg. She smiled. The angry shouting had been an act. "Don't tell your dad," she whispered, handing me the bowls. She leaned closer to me. Her face filled my vision. She softly brushed her thumb against my cheek. It twinged in pain for a moment before settling into a dull throb. "Your dad is going through a lot," she said, her voice quiet and sad. There was a soft thud. I couldn't tell where it came from. Maybe it was Dad still thundering around, or maybe it was Joel. I had to get back. "He doesn't mean it," Mum said. "I know," I said, glancing at the door. My words were hollow. I already knew what her request was going to be. It was an accident, and there was no need to tell my friends about what happened. Gossip spreads fast around here, and it could cause all sorts of trouble. We were a family full of secrets, and I'd learned to lock the worst ones away. Like Mum's daytime friend, Ricky, or the time I found Dad crying in the bathtub clutching a bloodied cricket bat. I pretend I don't remember these things. It's quite easy with a bit of practice. I edged towards the door in nervous frustration, but Mum held my chin in her fingers, crouched down, and looked me right in the eyes. "Thank you for being there for Joel," she said, slipping a 5-pound note into my shirt and giving me a big, beautiful smile. "For your next adventure." The words, "I think Joel is hurt," almost tumbled from my mouth, but I kept them locked away, clenched behind my gritted teeth. It took everything to stop myself from diving into her, bawling my eyes out against her ragged blondie t-shirt. It was an accident. Nobody's fault. Dad doesn't need to know, does he? Of course he does, you idiot. He'd find out, and there'd be hell to pay. I'd hurt his favorite boy. How badly, I didn't know. I didn't want anyone to know. I was going to fix this. It was all going to be fine. I nodded and kept my mouth shut, forcing my lips into a smile. "You okay?" she asked. I was on the verge of tears but squeezed my eyes shut, nodding as I scuttled towards the door. Mom said nothing as I left the room. I stumbled across the hallways towards the bedroom, barely holding myself upright. It was like the house was being thrown about in the ocean. My stomach was full of seawater and maggots. As I pulled the door handle, I prayed to find my brother there. No beanie, no maggots, just him. When I stepped into the bedroom, I almost threw up. The air was thick with a moist tang, dull and sharp at the same time. It slid down into my gut. The stench reminded me of the cat we found at the pit a few months back. Its belly was open, and it had been eaten by some kind of animal. Joel's eyes darted towards me. "I'm sorry, Bart. I picked it," he said. He was still lying across the desk chair, his head leant back over the arm, gaze fixed on the ceiling. The beanie was gone, and I finally could see the hurt I'd caused. The back of his skull looked like a bloomed flower. Bits of hair and bone hung loosely over the chair. A stream of thick blood oozed from the back of his head, spilling out across the floor and creating a red lake in the middle of the room. It shimmered, the edges bubbling and bursting. Wisps of steam curled away from it. The blood was boiling. A shredded torso pulled itself out from the lake by 2 meaty sticks. It had a battered, half-formed face made of bone and gristle, with 2 piercing eyes. The eyes looked at me, and the meat man smiled. It was a smile I recognized. "Hello, Kippers, seen your dad about?" he asked,